Back once again, and we're talking about what? A flawed system, rebuilding a nation, the African diaspora and its lasting impact. I've been coming on here now for quite about a couple of weeks. And as we move forward, we're going to talk about this more and more and more. And we talk about the impact. We talk about the impact. So my name is Lolita Renee Gilmore Randall. And this morning, I have an individual with us, Mr. LaShavio Little. He's going to tell you about himself and some things that he's doing in our community. Great community advocate and a powerful man of God. And so, as we move forward, we always want to talk about what is the solution. We know there's been a lasting impact. What is the solution to our problems? But first, we need to talk about as we move forward, looking at this. Isn't that a beautiful picture? And you're like, oh, okay, look at that. And so let's go on. And so this is Mr. LaShavio Little, moving past domestic violence. We know the African American culture, the family, what has happened, the racial trauma, but how do we move forward? And I'm going to give him a minute to talk about this. But first, let me let you know, show you our overview. And our overview right now is this educational podcast, and we're exploring, examining the diaspora impact on the African American culture, the family, and the faith-based community. We look at these four areas: the Great Awakening, the Great Divide, an identity crisis, and Jesus, the corrected action plan. But before I go another further, Mr. LaShavio, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey, well, you said good morning. Glad to be here. Thank you so much. Well, outside the military, outside of the railroad, currently right now, I am a financial advisor. And I can tell you that when there's people with money, they know how to let their money make money and continue to pass it down for generations. So my primary focus is going into communities and educating those that may not have the opportunity to understand that. And so therefore, the lack of that education keeps, our people basically in the same situation, generations over generations over generations. And so that's what my love is, my passion is helping and bringing value back to underserved communities.
All right. And that's powerful because as we go through this presentation, you're going to see the impact that we're talking about. And I know some, they have the idea and they say, you know what, get over it. This happened many, many moons ago, and we understand that, yeah, it happened many, many moons ago, but here's the deal. It's still happening. And because it's still happening, you're like, what is still happening? Well, the survival and the current state of the African American family and its historical relational ties to the Black church is still happening. We're still talking about that desire for radical change. We're still talking about what Christ said from the days of John the Baptist until now. The kingdom of heaven suffered violence, and the violence taking it by force. That's profound. And we're looking at that and we say, how do we apply this to where we are now, the current state? In the current state, in some areas it's awesome. But in some areas, we still see the need for a trauma-informed society, government, justice system in regards to domestic violence, child abuse, neglect, substance abuse, juvenile delinquency, the prison system, and the high rate of recidivism, along with a plethora of other maladaptive generational behaviors. We're trying to build the family again. It all starts with the family unit. We have to move forward with the family because right now it is dangerously fragmented. It really is. Although some would be like, you know what? This is not the norm. Not having a father in the home is not the norm. And I will be the first to say that as a female, because you have there's a narrative that we promote now. Well, you know what? I don't need the man in the house. So that's not even biblical. Okay. And so now it's all right to teach independence, but even that has gotten to a point where it can't become toxic. All right. And so sometimes in our independence, it's become toxic because of the areas that we're seeing right here: domestic violence, child abuse and neglect, substance abuse, juvenile delinquency, the prison system, and the high rate of recidivism. So what's happening? That's the fragmentation of the family that we're talking about. And as we move in that direction, people get angry. People feel like it's me against the world. And I tend to believe, and we're not going to get into that topic because they're talking about the Miss Valley, but I believe that is one of the areas where you get the narrative of the angry Black woman or the strong Black woman, because all of this started somewhere. And when we look at all the systems that we're striving and pushing against, this has built a callous mindset, if you will, to say that there are certain individuals that I don't need in a part of the African American community that's not needed, and that's not true. So there's so many narratives that have been erroneously applied that we have to begin to move forward and say, let's correct this narrative, let's correct this thinking, let's correct the way forward. And how do we move forward with that? How do we handle that? And that's why we're talking about domestic violence this morning, because out of all of the issues that we're talking about, this is the one that we're going to highlight, and that's domestic violence. And so when we look at it, one of the reasons we want to highlight it, I just love this number right here. And the numbers, not to say that they haven't changed since 2020, but it was just when I saw this, I always use it, and I'll continue to use it when we're in 2025, 2030. But it was at that particular time, as of 2020, the Department of Family Protective Services removed 437,238 children from their families.
Wow.
With 38%, of this population being African American. And not only was it African American were removed, but remained in the system. So that is how we talk. That's why we come together now and we talk about the correlation of how the historical and racial trauma and the current views of this fragmented system and the church's lack of engagement is promoting and is a great part or a conduit to this perpetual crisis that we see. So we keep looking at that. And this is why you guys are like, every time we go to this page or this channel, this is what we're talking about. And we're going to keep talking about it because we need to talk about it. We need to get movement on it. We need individuals to say, wait a minute, that those numbers are a bit staggering, which is why we present the numbers. Because when you look at it, it's just like your paycheck. It's just like your bank account. You can go out and you're doing all these great things and you have all these great plans. And you're like, I'm just going to New York next year. I'm going to, and after that, I'm going to go to wherever I'm going to go. I have all these great plans. I'm going to go to Disney World. I'm going to be out in California. I'm doing all these things. And then we look at that account and we look at the numbers and we said, that may not be possible right now. No. That tells me that I have some work to do right now. And I may need to just plan a little bit better, because if it's not lining up with what I want, I feel this way. But my numbers, my whole point is saying this, your numbers will help you get a better understanding of where you really, really are. These numbers help us get an understanding of where we really, really are. And so this is why we say, from a biblical perspective, and as we move on to this, I bring this up because this whole podcast right now that we're doing will be a part of the Jakes Divinity School, George Fox University, and Portland Seminary archives. So as a doctoral student and moving forward and working on my dissertation, this podcast has become a part of that artifact, as an artifact. And what does that mean? That means that it also goes and it would be part of the university's archives, the three entities that I just mentioned. And that's Jakes Divinity, George Fox University, and Portland Seminary. So this is how we said we're talking about selling the narrative. But this is not our focal point, our focus this morning in the biblical perspective. But like I said, we are both faith believers. And because of that, our faith will be mentioned during this and how it's going to get us from point A to point B when we're talking about domestic violence. So this is just a brief overview. This is what you get when we talk about African Americans are disproportionately represented among victims and perpetrators of domestic violence, particularly intimate partner. Why do we say particularly? My tongue is getting tired this morning. Intimate partners. Why? Because not everybody's married. Okay. And our definition of family has changed drastically. Our definition of what boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever the scenario may be, has changed. So now we say intimate partner violence. So the research identifies a number of risk factors. And that, look at the risk factors: poverty, high rates of unemployment, alcohol abuse, use of illegal drugs, and exposure to community or family violence. So when we look at that, we say, wait a minute, disturbing trends. And now we want to try to encourage efforts to seek and gain a deeper understanding of the cultural and situational context in which domestic violence occurs among African Americans. It's very complex, but our goal here is to talk about it, okay? Expose some areas of how we can do better or where we can do better, and talk about the way forward. And if you saw in the beginning, the first slide, one or two of the slides that I showed, we talked about Jesus being part of that corrective plan. So when I say Jesus, your spiritual component, the spirit man. Now we're talking about the physical, we're talking about the social. Can we talk about the spiritual as well? And coming in, how all of this comes together and provides a holistic approach on how we move forward. And somebody is asking, well, what does this have to do with the African diaspora? What does this have to do with the transatlantic slave trade? What does this have to do with it? Well, this is why. It says it's a worldwide, when we talk about the African diaspora being a worldwide collection of communities descended from native Africans or people from Africa, predominantly in the Americas, this is what we refer to. And were enslaved and shipped to the Americas between the 16th and the 19th centuries, with their largest populations being in the United States. So why do I bring that forward? Because when you have a people who have been moved and removed, we're talking about that removal and what it looks like, the impact that it has. And is it still ongoing? I would say that it is. And so this is where we come and say, wait a minute, we have to look at the totality of suffrage regarding it and what happened throughout that, the family dynamics we see with domestic violence and child abuse. We have to look at the Western civilization single axis on racism, because you were brought here, but there was never a system put in place for this particular population and have a resolve. And so what does that single axis on racism look like? Slavery, Jim Crow, civil rights, free labor, the prison system now. And it's the Bible colorblind. What narrative do we believe? Does culture have a place? Now, this is phase one. When we talk about the Great Awakenings. And I like saying the Great Awakenings because as my kids and my grandbaby, like, oh, no, we woke now. That's the term that they use. We woke now. We call it the Great Awakening. We woke, okay? And so the Black church's lack of ethical leadership and social engagement. Simply put, is Christ still the head of the church? Now, that was phase one when we came into this. But then we go on and we say, now phase two, we look at it a little bit deeper. And we said, it went from what we saw in phase one to breaking down the totality of suffrage from that. And now we see the racial trauma, the acute trauma, the chronic, the complex. Now we see the paradigm shifts over on the single axis of racism. Are we ready for change? And what does it look like when we talk about these disruptive systems and unjust policies? We're still over here. What narrative do we believe when we present the Bible as a weapon or as truth? And where are we as a whole? So, with that being said, now we understand why we're having these conversations when it comes to the African diaspora, because of all this information. If it did not have an impact, and if a people has not been affected, why are we seeing all of this? And why do we continue to see it? So this and so in doing all of that, how do we get past this? You see at the bottom, I will always say solutions, 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 and the impact that we continue to see. And these are some other interesting facts. But before I go any further, I want to give my guest a chance to talk about himself, introduce himself again, and tell me, what do you think thus far, Mr. Little, from what we've seen? That's a lot, right?
Okay, I'll share myself. I'll share who I am and where I've come from and the things that I've experienced. Okay, is that okay?
No, it's fine. Great.
Okay. So as of today, I am married, 24 years. I have 6 children. But as it relates to, my family, that's not something that's possible, right? My mom and dad was never together and didn't really have that good representation to see how that was. All the relationships that my mother was in was abusive relationships, okay? And that's what I saw as a child. And my experience was what was in my household. And so it got to the point, I remember one day when my mom and who she was with, they got into it really, really bad. And, my mom in the hospital, etc. But my mom had gave me a hug. She was crying. And remember, I'm a young man, I'm helpless, right? I'm literally helpless. But I'm hugging my mother and she's saying to me, promise me you never put your hands on a woman. Promise me, and I'm crying with her. I promise, Mom, I won't do that. I promise, So that was something that always stuck with me. Having people around me that was having so many problems, so their go-to was the drugs and alcohol. It intensified, a lot of the abuse, a lot of the anger, a lot of things that young children are exposed to in that area. Mm-hmm. So, one day again, big fight happening, and I think my mom was going to die, and I have to run out the house. And I have a neighbor, but who I was familiar with was my buddy across the street. So I'm running across the street, banging on the door, asking them, I'm crying, asking them could they call the police. So this is what, as a young person that, my life was exposed to. My mom was a great person. My dad was a great person. Okay. Mm-hmm. However, our experiences in our community and how I was raised, it was very challenging and it can really mess with you. Okay. My mother's brother, which is my uncle, he ended up killing himself and right in the backyard, he hung himself in the backyard and I saw him on my way to school. So like I said, just being exposed to that, man, being exposed to the shootings and all of that, I'm supposed to be, a dangerous man in society, right? I'm supposed to, now that I have someone that loves me, I'm supposed to, go upside her head. Mm-hmm. I'm supposed to be really strong and stern on my children. I mean, that's the narrative, right? That's what I know. So that's how it should be. However, through all of that, my mom had me go on a bus on Sundays to church. It regardless what was going on. And by being there, there was some teachings and some love that was shared to me and all of us as a little child. So with my mom hugging me and have me, promise her I would never hit a woman, as being a young person in the church and going to Bible study and being around those adults that really love the Lord and instilling that in me as a young person, then I have that. So as I move forward in my life, to the military, one thing the military has said was, basically you don't put your hands on a person, you got to walk away. Right. And it sounds easy, right? But there's no skills. There is nothing tangible that can teach us how to walk away. So now you're in a heated discussion, right? Something took place. You have 2 adults and you're trying to walk away. What happens if the person that you're with stands in front of the door? What happens if the person you're with takes the keys? What happens? What do you do, right? Right. You're getting angry. They're angry. You're trying to walk away, remove yourself from the situation. What do you do? So that's where we talk about solution. That's where we have to, get that counseling. We have to you have to receive these tools that can help us in those type of situations. So that is the lack of at this point that I see. Okay, not having the right tools to help us through that moment, right? That moment, because in that moment I've now done something. Okay, and then after that moment, I'm saying, "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. I was angry." I'm using all those excuses for my behavior, for my action. So, and that's what I saw as an adult. You know, it was, if my mom was going to be with the same person after the fact, it was, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. I was angry. You know, you made me do it. You know, stuff like that. So, my personal experience and my, opinion to this is the counseling, is learning what to do in those situations. But for me, what helped me is my mom crying and hugging me and making me promise that I wouldn't do it. So no matter what happened in my life, if I got angry, I had to always hold that promise. You know what I'm saying? So I didn't have all the tools, but I had a promise to my mom. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So that's what I'll say for right now.
Wow. As I was listening to you, and thank you so much for sharing, because what that does is say that when we find ourselves in situations, and like you talk about the traumatic experiences that you encounter, because it's traumatic to see and witness the domestic violence. That's traumatizing. And you mentioned your uncle. And so now, whatever the result was, whatever he was dealing with, level of trauma he was dealing with, that would drive him to that point. And so it helps me to go back. I want to go back to the one slide where we were talking about. We looked at the African diaspora, and right here, poverty, high rates of unemployment, alcohol abuse, use of illegal drugs, and exposure to community or family violence. And so when you look at that, and what we're trying to do is gain that deeper understanding, like you said, I didn't have the tools, but I had a promise. I had a promise to my mother that this wouldn't happen. But when we talk about the suffrage, what caused, because the person, the abuser, we understand the old analogy that hurting people hurt people. Yes. What was that individual? What level of trauma was that individual dealing with? And so history and research is showing us that when we look at this is where we see the increase of the family dynamics, the domestic violence, and the child abuse, because this is where we've learned over on the right, based on the racial trauma and that we've seen within this country, with the slavery, the Jim Crow, the civil rights, and the prison system. All of this goes back to the limited ability for unemployment, open doors. And we talked about it, especially with the prison system. If a person has any judicial situations, or we're talking about not just the judicial part, but we talk about the prison system. When we come back, a person has now been labeled. And so when all of these issues are happening, and you got all these little nuances that's happening that you're trying to deal with, and we're not making an excuse for the abuser. We're not making an excuse for the person that stays with the abuser, because one of the theories that I personally have is that you have a lot of people say, well, why did she just stay with this individual? When we look at the right over here and see everything that's been happening, particularly it happened to the Black woman, but primarily to the Black man. So when we see all of this happening, how did we learn to communicate? Did it become a matter of respect, or trying to learn how to have a healthy relationship that has never been modeled before? And then we come in with the illicit drugs, or we come in with other coping mechanisms, like the substance abuse, the alcohol. And when we begin to look at all of that, these are the primary contributing factors that we see that are terribly just tearing down the African American family. Well, all families, let's say we contribute to our family, but particularly in the African American family. Because now we go back to that 38% of the numbers of children removed were African American children. What I'm tying together here is trying to get the understanding across that because of the domestic violence, the children are moved from the child abuse takes place and the neglect takes place. Because if I'm being abused, it's very hard for me to focus in the area. Now I can and I try my best, but my children are still um, exposed to what we call vicarious trauma or secondary trauma,
Mm.
because that's the witnessing, of it all. Because now you walk away and your mother loved you. I got it. I'm not going to do these things, but I still don't have the skill set to know how to move forward. So with that being said, I point this out because my thing is to have these conversations, and I like what you said is as far as your spiritual growth, and looking at that, is Jesus Christ still the head of the church? What role did your belief system play into who you are today? What role did the impact of that domestic violence that you saw in your family has contributed to who you are today?
Mm.
And so when you were talking about your family, and that wouldn't have happened with you and your mother, but it's happening now with you and your children and your wife. How did that come to be?
Okay.
And what I mean by that is, after seeing all of this, did you have to go to counseling? Did you have to, and seeking a biblical perspective on how this can help? Who was there? Was there a mentor? When you came into the military, did we have programs and things in place? What are the systems in place to help you get from point A to point B?
Okay. So I shared that, I was going to Bible study, and that was, something that was very, very beneficial for me. In the military, yes, I had a mentor, a pastor, and he showed, tremendous love. And actually, you're watching, right? We watch people. And I'm watching this guy for a very, very long time, waiting for him to mess up, waiting for him to mess up. But he just showed so much love and for people, and his heart's desire to really help people. So I'm drawn to him, and I ended up going to his church, and we became really good friends, right? And so whenever I would have those situations with my wife, he was the person I would call, and he would come over to the house, no matter what time it was, And this is important to have people in your life that when you are going through something, we call it a crisis, that it matters to someone else to stop what they're doing to come and help you, right? And so again, I had that. He came over, and he would listen to both sides, and it just seems as though every time my wife was right. Okay. And I had to deal with that. I had to deal with that. I had to learn, and I had to become better. Now I have 4 daughters, and I have 2 boys. Okay. So that's my 6 children. I have 4 girls. So naturally, I don't want my daughters to be harmed, right? Naturally, I want everything to be okay as it relates to my daughters, right? My mom, my daughters, my wife, etc. But through all that understanding and teaching, what I grabbed from that was, I don't know how or why, because my experience in growing up was different, but I never drank any alcohol. I never smoked. I never did that stuff, okay? And having my family, I wanted to help change the generation, right, that I think was the curse that was being put on us. And so, raising them in a household where they go open the refrigerator up and, there's no alcohol in there, right? I'm not smoking. I'm not doing anything. Mom's not doing anything. So none of that contribute to any outwardly arguments, right? Like, if we had some situations, we was able to handle that to ourselves, okay, and not in front of the children. But my wife and I, the key to this, I can tell you, we had that conversation when we was dating. I share with her basically what I'm sharing right now to everyone, that this is how I was raised, and I don't want a family like this. Okay, I want something different. And again, she also, because of that, held me accountable. For what we talked about. But I had the pastor, someone real close to me, that would come and speak to me, and my wife, and help us through a situation and gave us the tools that we needed. And I think that is so important in our communities to have someone that you can call upon.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And thank you, because see, that's the segue until where we go over here and talk about the church lack of engagement.
Mm.
And because I love the fact that you had that support system. I love the fact that it's because you saw the violence, you said, no, I'm not going to get into this. But there are times when individuals see, and it's because of the violence, that they do get into it, and they do get into the drugs, and they do get into the alcohol, they do get into the maladaptive behaviors because of the trauma. And so, but it seems that your wife played a critical role. And I'm not going to dig too deep, but when you said when she would hold you to that, so that presupposes in my mind that there were some things that we did take away from our background that we brought into the marriage that was like, no, that's not going to work. That's not going to work. And we're going to have to redirect. And so, do you mind telling me what are some of those things that did come along because of because of the exposure and being in the environment that had to be redirected?
Sure. You know, having our heated, argument, let's say, right? Have a heated argument. And remember I said, military teacher, you just leave, right? Just remove yourself. Okay.
Yeah.
And so, I'm tired. I'm ready. I want to go. I want to leave. And in that process of me leaving, my wife reminded me, again, about conversation. Like, hey, you can't run from this. Like you have to stand up and be accountable, right? And you cannot run from this here. And so that made it, for me, I would say, like, I have brothers and sisters by way of my father, right? And again, my mom and dad wasn't together. And here I am angry and I want to leave because that's my solution. And by her bringing that to my attention that, hey, you said you don't want to be outside of the household and your children not raised without their mother and father and, all of that, that brought perspective back. Okay. And whatever we was going through, I understood at that point that was just for the moment. It wasn't a forever thing. And what I was trying to do because of my anger was a forever decision by leaving. Okay. And that means I was going to repeat, what I was around, how I grew up, etc. And so those are, here's an example of, my wife just holding me accountable, saying you can't run because you're angry. I'm angry, you know what I'm saying? But I'm here, I'm gonna deal with it. You got to deal with it, And so, but she was raised differently, so she understood how to handle where all I knew was, again, if I can't put my hands on you, then I'm gonna leave, right? And if I'm gonna leave in anger, then I'm gone. Forget it. I'm tired. I'm done, right? Because that's all I knew. Literally, that's really what I knew to do. And again, having her, really be a strong woman and hold me accountable and bring me back to the things that we put out in the beginning and hold true to that.
Wow. And so, and that is where we are when we talk about this great awakening, because this is where our children and our community, they need to hear that. I'm not going to say it didn't impact me, because from what I'm hearing, there was an impact, and it was a huge impact. So everything that had been learned, we had to get into a place where it was unlearned, And so you're like, okay, but then there was a system. Now we're having systems in place, and this is what we call a flawed system. And so in the flawed system, we're just identifying the areas that really need support, and those areas that really need someone to say that, that could happen to anybody. And you hear a lot of people say that, oh, that could happen to anybody. Yeah, it could happen to anybody, but it was happening to me. And because it was happening to me and happening in the manner in which it was, that was my crisis. Forever how long it lasted, whether it was for 72 hours, whether it was for 2 hours, or whether it lasted up to 6 weeks. So to get that crisis resolved, we had to get back to the place where we're functional, where we were before that. But when I hear people say that, I also hear you saying, but I was angry. And this is how I dealt with my anger. And I want to ask, why were we so angry? It's just that we had some things we had to resolve in our life. And so, and in trying to do that, but now I have other individuals that I'm concerned with. I have a family, I have a wife, I have children. Me leaving is just not an option. But for many, it has been an option when we talk about some of the things we see in society. And I want to bring up a couple of these slides when I say interesting facts. When we look at that the U.S. population is represented by African Americans and Hispanics compared to 56 of the U.S., 32%, 56% of the U.S. incarcerated population being represented by African Americans and Hispanics. We look at 2014, and there again, I have other dates and other information that is more up to date. But when I look at, I use this just to show, to present a pattern and where it starts. And you'll see a slide later where this number is increasingly worse. But as of 2014, African Americans constituted 2.3 million, or 34% of the total 6.8 million correctional population. That's huge. Mm-hmm. That's huge. And so we said, and then African Americans are incarcerated at more than 5 times the rate of our white Americans. And the imprisonment rate for African American women is 2 times that of our white women. So nationwide, African American children represent 32% of children who are arrested. And we're talking about children now. Mm-hmm. 42% of children who are detained, and 52% of children whose cases are judicially waived to criminal court. I like to stop right there for a minute and say that's important, because what that tells me is that you have individuals, this waived to criminal court is it went from I'm a child, but I am now being tried as an adult. 52%. And African American children represent 14% of that population. So 52% of children whose cases are judicially waived to court. We, African Americans, represent 14% of that population. And so now 7% of adults in the U.S. are under correctional supervision. That equates to 1 out of every 37 adults in the U.S. The reason I bring up these facts, because when we talk about domestic violence and we see all of this happening and individuals getting back into their homes, the impact. And why are these numbers so critical and so staggering? And we're looking at it, if we are to believe that there was no impact here, why are the families dealing with the domestic violence? Why are we so angry? Why can we not communicate properly? And I take it back to when we look at slavery and Jim Crow, what was happening in those eras? What was happening when the oppression is coming along? What's happening when I'm stereotyped or racially profiled? What's happening with all of that? And then when I get home and I'm expected to be the leader, I'm expected to be the head, and I've had all this to happen in society. So when I come here, what I call my domain, now it's about power and control. I have to have control over something or someone. That's just the mindset of some. And when we look at the numbers, is it not, and I'm not justifying the behavior, but is it not understandable?
Yes, it's understandable. I'll speak on this, and I want to go back a little bit too. When I can recall a time where my wife had told me, you know, you're nice to everybody else out there in the world, but then you come home and then you're a little bit more abrasive to me. And I didn't understand that, right? But it's like I didn't have any tolerance, you know, when I come home, because I feel like all my tolerance was taken up out there in society and the world, right? Like right now, how I'm dressed and I go out in the world, you know, I'm like this. But if I get, you know, a little bit more comfortable and relaxed, well, there's some things that come along with that because I'm a Black man. That's just the reality of our life. Mm-hmm. And so you always walking around and maintaining your best behavior, your best version of yourself, right? Because you don't want to get misunderstood or have those statistics reflect you in your life. So I had cousins, I had friends, things like that were young and they've been in the system. They've been in the system, but that's just something I didn't want. That's just something I didn't want. But what I want to go back to is I did not know what love looked like. I did not know what love was, right? I knew the idea of love, but I didn't know how to really display love. What was more valuable, and I really dislike to say this, but what was more valuable was the material things, right?
Yeah.
You have your nice pair of shoes. You want to keep it clean. You want to make sure you impress. You have a nice new outfit. You don't want nothing to get on it. So you're taking care of that. But far as the human being beside you, you don't know how to take care of that person, right?
Right.
There's a disconnection emotionally, I would say. And so that's some of the things that Pastor would come and he would communicate and help me understand how I had to love my wife as Christ loved the church. That was important. That was critical in my development, in my changing the way the things that of my past and what I saw and what I had in my head and how I responded to the new. And so the solutions again is learning how to love, learning what love is, and then knowing how to really display that and understand that there is tolerance, there is patience, there is all of that come with love if you love someone. So here's my wife loving me and displaying all these actions, but yet she's telling me that after I come home from a corporate world, corporate, and I come home, I'm short. I want to go to myself, right? I don't have that time, but yet I'm Mr. Great Guy out here in the world, and so I mean, literally, as a human being, as a person, you got to take that in. It has to matter, and you want to change and you want to develop and be better. Yes, I wanted to explain to her why I was like that and what was going on and all that, but there wasn't a time for me to do that. I had to take that in and listen, because those are some of the tools that I learned that I have to be ready to. I had to be more ready to listen and understand where she's coming from versus me trying to tell my part, right? And give these reasons of why I'm displaying these type of actions. And that was something that helped us as well. Listening and learning my wife, and then taking upon that and learning myself to be able to be more of what she asked me to be is a great part of us having these 24 years of marriage and me learning what love is.
That part, learning what love is. So when we talk about the number of children that we see, we go right down here, 42% of children who are detained, 32% of these children who are arrested, and 52%. When we look at numbers like this, where's the love? You know what I mean?
Yes.
That is where we're talking about this impact, because now for you are very fortunate, very, very fortunate. And I'm so glad we're having this conversation. But because now we're going to move towards, when we talk about domestic violence, we also have to bring in the child welfare system, because child abuse and neglect comes into that as well. So they're kind of like running parallel when we see this. And so now that we have that answer and we're looking at all of this, we're seeing these numbers. Is it because the idea and ideology of love is somewhat skewed? And it's skewed because now we go back to trauma, because all of this represents trauma, complex trauma, compound trauma. All right. And so when we look at all of that, it may not all be associated with racial trauma, historical, but we begin to say, where were these behaviors learned? How did we come to be? And growing up in a society that is antagonistic, so to speak. And so you're trying to get into it and you're trying to build and you're trying to work, and you have this huge obstacle that said this paradigm that we see now was not created with you in mind. And so there's a constant struggle to try to get in there. There's a constant struggle of ideas and beliefs that we have, that we've put into place. So the same thing, what ideas and beliefs were produced from what we're seeing right here. If the kids are coming out of the system, or we're coming out of the prison system, or and it's not to say that anybody has to commit a crime. That's not what we're promoting here, but it's just saying there are some contributing factors here that will put you in a place, because I'm so excited and happy for you, because that could have gone in an entirely different direction. That could have happened when you didn't listen to mom and say, well, you know what? I'm going to solve my matters from physically.
Right.
I know how to fight it out. So, but what you did, and what we would say, that coping, that defense mechanism, and the defense was, I either going to fight, or I'm going to take flight. So we decided to take flight. So that's your defense mechanism. And so now you've learned how to deal with that. When we get to the point where we're talking about all of this, so oftentimes it's too late, because we're talking about it to the incarcerated victims, individuals. We're talking about it to children who have been detained. We're talking to them from a standpoint of, because of the maladaptive behavior, now you're considered a menace because you've not learned how to deal with the trauma. How do we get to a trauma-informed society, or a trauma-informed church, or a trauma-informed government system, to say this is why, this is not that. They're just not children that decided one day, well, I just grow up and I'll be a menace. They're coming out of homes where these issues have not been addressed. And so rather than address the issues, what we're doing is walking around in a perpetual state, what we call a perpetual state crisis, because now this is being passed on. And this is how I learn. So you said, like, I never learned to love, because in my household, love looked like I come home, I bring the paycheck, you just do what I tell you to do. And the minute that you don't, then a physical altercation takes place. And the wife understands, because she knows, or she's looking and saying, the world has been very cruel to you. So when you come here, I understand why you're so angry. And so when we have a level up, because a lot of people are like, well, why does the victim stay? Well, a lot of times that's why, because they're trying to apply logic and understand, well, I know why he's so mean, or I know why this is happening. But if it's hurting me in the process, whether I know or not, I have to become a protective parent. I have to become that protector of the household, and saying I move away. So it goes back to a conversation you and I were having earlier about the independent person that says, well, I don't need all of that in my life. I can just be mom and dad. I'll be the independent Black woman. I'll be the angry Black woman. I'll be whatever it is you want me to be, but I'm not going to deal with that. And so now we got to come. And that's why I said we were talking about, how do you feel about the narrative of pushing a trauma-informed church and government system and societal system when it comes to the African-American population and the impact of the African diaspora?
I think it's needed. I think it's very much so needed. A great idea would be, essentially, to help eliminate excuses, is have a bus go into our, impoverished neighborhoods and pick up the men that say, that's what we're talking about right now, and take them to a church, right? Whether it's every Tuesday or every Thursday, just pick them up, take them to church, and have some counselors there, right? And have those type of dialogue discussions of becoming better and learning yourself and learning why you react a certain way, and like we're doing right now with this discussion. And if we do that and help eliminate, and people in the neighborhood knows, hey, the bus is coming, get on that bus, John, and go ahead and go and have that conversation and pick up some tools and learn and come back and be better and start applying them, right? And seeing other men in your neighborhood becoming better and having those type of discussions, outwardly. Like, all I wanted to do today was be transparent, right?
Right.
Just be transparent. My life wasn't perfect. I had to learn a lot. I took a lot of my anger and frustration out into the sport world. I wanted to be the best track person I could be. I wanted to be the best running back I could be. I wanted to be the best boxer I could be. That's how I took my frustrations and anger out, was in sports, just trying to be the best that I could be at that. But loving someone, I didn't know how to do that. Okay.
Right.
I had to gain the tools for that. So essentially it's going to take a start. A start is we have to just really focus on taking that sacrifice, have that bus go to the neighborhood, pick them up, drop them off. And remember, it may be one the first week. It may be none the first week, right? But that's
Right.
something you have to do. Know it's available, continue to promote that. And eventually, you're going to have 10 men on the bus. Eventually, you may have 20 men on the bus, right? Because we're learning and we're having a great time and we're developing. And now you have some type of brotherhood system that's going to be there for you, okay? And it's a little bit informal, so it's not like, maybe going somewhere else. It's a little bit more informal. We understand, we're going through, we all in this together, okay? And I think that helps, right? Something is better than nothing. I think that helps.
And it does. And that's why we want to come to our solutions. And you've given quite a few. But what I love about the entire conversation, you always went back to the importance of your faith, the importance of having something to fall on and to stand on, something to believe in. And when we're not saying something, we're talking about the word of God.
Yes.
And so now we're saying that we have to believe in something bigger than ourselves. And I like that concept because the old African proverb that God is in everything. Everything we see, everything we hear, God is in it. And so when we look at that and we bring that back and we're talking about how to build the family unit, I think it's important to say that we got to bring God back as the focal point. It has to be the nucleus of this because we have to start. Where's the starting point? And we go back to the beginning. And in the beginning was the Word, and Word was with God, and Word was God. In the beginning was Him. So we have to go back to the beginning. And so now we're going and we see artists like Kirk Franklin going into the prison systems, and they're singing these songs and they're doing all these things because here we're finding a big part of the families are behind these bars, and so now we're looking at that and like, okay, how do we get this done? How do we do this? How do we move forward? And so my solution is, and it sounds like your solution, and what we want to promote is, can we do this with Jesus? Because Jesus is love.
Yes.
And when He gave one of the two greatest commandments. And so when we start talking about love, and we start talking about, love God with all your heart, mind, spirit, and soul, and have no other God before, and love your neighbor as yourself. So we look at those two. So then we begin to go back and say, well, could this got to be about love? And we go over into the book of 1 Corinthians, and we talk about love. So we begin to look at all of this and we come back and we say, now this Bible, if we are going to make a stand and say, let us come to the place where we're healing, a place of healing, the Bible has to be a key source to this. I'm not saying it's the only answer, but I say it is the answer. And the reason I say is the answer, because you got the sociologist, you got the psychologist, you have the medical team, you have the archaeologists, you have all of this information that has to come forward and making it whole. And the reason we talk about the God, the Word, the solution, because everything that was made by Him. And so if we don't believe that and we get to this point, this is why we see this huge exodus of our young people exiting the church. And so not only and as we see the masses leaving, we also see the increase in the areas of crime, unemployment, drug use, the same things that we showed earlier. We see an increase in that because what we see is a lack of faith and a lack of hope. And if you're telling me that this is it and this is all I have with my little gang members and my friends right here, that's all I have. And that's all I have to hold on to. I don't see life getting any better. That's why we ask the question, where is the church? And has the church lost its power? And is Jesus still the head? We know that the Bible has been used, especially when the trade, the transatlantic slave trade, as a weapon. We know that. So now we want to have it and present it to our youth and our children now as truth. But the children are saying we woke now. We saw Big Mama and Mama and all them give to the church forever and forever. And when somebody died, we had to pass the hat. And we see, and that's why I like when you talk about insurance and the importance of having these policies. And so then they saw Mama, Big Mama, and as I always say, I saw Mama, Big Mama. We got to change that narrative. Then we saw Dad and Papa, in there as well. And so in working, and now here we are. I saw the church come together and build the community. We want to change the narrative. Saw the church come in, and like you had the pastor that was coming into the home and letting you know this is not right, how we have to move forward. So I think it's imperative, if we're talking about solution focus, that we have to bring structure back. And that, I believe, as a believer, starts with the word of God. What do you say about that?
Absolutely agree. As we display love, I mean, love is accepting, right? Love is understanding. And so, we may be different across the board. However, the love that I have for you is accepting, right? It's acceptance. Again, what Pastor did was he displayed what love is. He displayed, actually, no matter what was going on, he responded in love. Okay. I got married very, very young, very, very young. So all I knew was what I knew at the time. And so I had to, thank God I found someone in my life that I was able to reach out to. But it's all about, in my opinion, love, because now we have the men going to the church and they're getting counseling, and now they want to better their neighborhoods. And so now they're walking around in their neighborhoods, keeping it safe. They're now talking to the young men, and they have an opportunity to be better examples in their community for the young men that's coming up and that's looking at them, right? So the narrative begin to change, far as, hey, we're not out here. I'm not seeing somebody, shooting somebody or getting angry and they're beating up somebody and jumping someone, or they're breaking into somebody's home, or they're stealing somebody's car. What I'm seeing and when I'm growing up now is these Black men in my community. They are having a great time. They're communicating with us. They're walking us to school. They're making sure that we're safe. They develop these different programs in our neighborhood that we can be part of and we can have a good time. And that changes the dynamics of trajectory of my life potentially, because these men who has now been helped now is able to give back and help the next generation, all through love, and God is love.
All through love. So love is the key. Yes. Love is the answer. And so now we have to get into our communities, and not only in our communities, but go back into the homes. So that hard exterior that we see, so many want to be hard. It's important just to be hard. But why are you being so hard? Why is that so important? And so, but with that, sometimes they're hard like that because they have nothing else to turn to. And that's why I wanted to highlight and hear about domestic violence from a male perspective, and how you got past it, how you were introduced to it, first of all, and then the impact it had on your life. But God, now you look and say, hey, this is what I know. And if you could do anything, and I heard you talking about the buses and getting into the neighborhoods, if you could say anything to a young person right now that's going through or growing up in a situation similar to yours, or being in a marriage, a young person in marriage now and trying to figure this thing out, or some coming out of the system and trying to figure it all out, what would you say to them?
I would say what I had to experience myself. You put one foot in front of the other, You understand that today's situation or problem is not a forever situation problem, and you have a way to work through that, work out of that. But you got to be consistent, working towards something better or greater than that situation you're in right now. You know that's a must. And if not, you're going to find yourself, the woe me, or it's everybody else's problems, everybody else's fault why I'm like this, and your situation never change. So put one foot in front of the other. Be very persistent in that change that you want to see. Like I had to be an example, right? Because I didn't have an example in my life, right? So I had to be that example. I couldn't use the excuse. Well, everybody else is smoking, everybody else is drinking, everybody else is, fighting. So I'm gonna do the exact same thing because I don't have no positive role models. I couldn't use that excuse if I wanted difference for my family and for myself. So we can do this. You can do it. Just be persistent and focusing on, and believe me, it will happen. Maybe not today, tomorrow, but it will happen.
So it's a process. It will happen.
Yes.
Trust the process.
Yes.
That's why he said, trust the process. Believe and trust the process. And I like that. I like that because what you're saying is my favorite verse, and it came to pass. And it came to pass. And it's going to pass if we just maintain, stick with the process, get the help that's needed. Because I don't want anybody to walk away and say, well, I don't know. Get the help that's needed. If you and your family need to go to counseling, find yourself a faith-based church, a Bible teaching church. Find that pastor or that support system that's needed, because we weren't meant to do this alone. We're not an island. No man is an island. We're not meant to do this alone. We're meant to move forward. And that's the importance of getting these programs in the communities so we don't have to go and look for it. We don't have to go and say, what's going on? A neighbor or a friend or someone may hear what you're going through, and they can say, I remember this young man, LaShavia Little, was talking about his situation, and this is what he did. And I understand that process. But we got to have the support systems in the community and accessible to the individuals. And that's what this podcast is all about, is that we get an understanding, and all our getting is get an understanding that we have to pull these systems together. We have to develop these systems, and they have to be in areas where they're accessible to everyone. And so we learn because what we learned that my people perish. God said, my people perish for lack of knowledge. So we have to learn how to move forward. We have to learn how to do well, and learn that you are not a victim.
That's right.
Okay. And maybe that we talk about the African diaspora, it did impact the African American population. We are not victims, and this is how we move forward. We move forward in Him. Mr. LaShavia Little, thank you so much for joining me today. This was awesome, rich. And so with that, I ask that you share this. If there are others who want to come on and talk about their situation, because see, we're trying to talk about it. I want to hear from the African-American males. The females, and we do. Don't nobody cut back at me. I know we already do. And so what we want to hear, I want to hear from the brothers. I want to hear from the males. And I want to hear how I got my family through. You said back in the old church, how I got over. How did I get my family through? Yes. And so, because we got to get back to the family unit. And I think this is the start. Well, thank you.
One more, if I may.
Yes, sir.
Perhaps the next time that we engage in the podcast, then because love is an action, then we're going to speak about what we have done in the community to impact change to become better through this. Today we talk about it. Great. These are some things I've been through. These are some things we notice out there in communities. Great. Now, what are we doing? What are we doing now to impact the change? And we're going to talk about that. So therefore people understand it's not about talking. We're sharing, right? Mm-hmm.
Yes.
But something's going to come after this. All right.
Yes, sir. Something is definitely going to come after this, and I will. And in fact, we will probably we'll talk about this a little bit more because we have ministries, we have nonprofits that individuals are coming together and looking at the methodology of care
Mhm.
and how that should be presented in every community and begin to move forward. So thank you, sir. I want to hear, and what he's also talking about is you talked about and I know we're running out of time. I got about 2 more minutes here, but what I want to, as far as insurance,
Okay.
and so I want to bring you back and talk about some things that we see happening in the African American community and what you've devised as a deterrent of sorts.
Okay.
When we put that in place, because it's all about solutions.
Yes.
Some everyone's gonna like, and some are gonna be like, no, I don't know if I'm ready to support that or not. But that's why Jesus said in the days of John the Baptist, the heavens suffer violence, and the violence take it by force. It's time to take these things back, take back the family. And we don't mean on a violent way, in a physical violence, but we're saying having a doggone spirit, that Caleb spirit, and having that tenacity to say enough.
Mm.
It's time to take it all back. It's time to take a stand. It's time to be vocal. And it's time to put our hands to the plow and make this work, because it will work if you work it.
Right.
All right. You be blessed, my friend. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
And to our audience, thank you guys for tuning in.
Yeah.
We will move forward and we will see you again soon. Subscribe. Let us know. Leave in the comments. If you too would like to be a guest, let me know. Okay. And we'll bring you on. But do understand, we are a faith-based community. Okay. And so you will hear me talk about my faith. That part is important. I will entertain and talk to anyone. I will respect and open up to anyone. I just ask that we do the same. So with that being said, God bless you, and we will talk to you later.
Right.
Bye.